Miss, I understand in lessons, but I'm struggling to remember what I've learned. Can you give me some tips on how I can remember and retain the information? How to remember what you've learned. So one of the common questions that I get asked from my students is, Miss, I understand in lessons, but I'm struggling to remember what I've learned. Can you give me some tips on how I can remember and retain the information? And so in this video, I'm going to give you my top 3 tips on how you can remember what you've learned. The first tip is to focus on key points or key terms. So let's say that you wanted to explain the melting points and boiling points of ionic compounds. Then you need to think, what are the key points or the key terms that I need to be able to explain this? So your first one, it's going to be structure. It's the giant ionic lattice. Then next, you need to think about bond. It has a strong ionic bond between the atoms. And then lastly, energy. A lot of energy is required to break the bonds. So once you have just those 3 points, then what's that going to do is it's going to act as memory triggers, and you're going to use it to help you expand and explain and essentially fill in the gaps. Now, don't worry if you're struggling initially to fill in the gaps. That's actually good. It shows that your brain is working, your memory is working, and actually that is one of the best ways, based on research, to learn and retain the information. You know, this process that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Second tip is I want you to use what I call brain triggers. So things like mnemonics, things like rhymes, things like associations, examples. Roy G. Biv, that's a classic example. Or you can use, if you're struggling to remember parts of a plant and animal cell, you want to compare them to, say, a school, for instance, and you think, oh, what happens in the classroom? That's where a lot of activities take place. Oh, I can liken that to the cytoplasm, where a lot of activities take place. So anything to sort of jog your memory, trigger your brain, that's going to be really, really helpful for you. And that is one thing that I do when I teach my students. We really crystallize each key area of our lesson to what is the easiest way that we are going to learn and remember this. Especially in science, you don't want to put a huge amount of information in your brain. You just want to go, what are the key points and how am I going to remember it? What are ways that I can use to remember it? And that's going to be really helpful for you. Lastly, you want to practice exam paper questions. Why? Because they're actually going to test your understanding. So many times we think we understand. When you do exam question, you realize that, actually, I don't understand. And then it's going to help you to develop your understanding. And what you find with exam paper questions is that you start to do the same topics over and over again in different questions, but just presented differently. And what is happening there is you are applying this term called spaced repetition, where you're spacing out your learning with different topics. And that again is one of the best ways scientifically to remember what you've learned. So that's my 3 top tips for you on how to remember what you've learned. The first thing was to focus on the key points and the key terms. Second thing was to use brain triggers. And thirdly, practice exam questions. So if you're someone who's struggling to remember what you've learned, I have developed a memory cheat sheet for you to help you remember those common scientific terms and processes. And if that's something you're interested in, that would be down below in this video for you.